Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
We, of course, want to start this episode by acknowledging the heartbreaking passing of Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Gaudreau in a tragic, I don't even want to call it accident, at the hands of an impaired driver who was driving recklessly as Johnny and Matthew were cycling. The entire hockey community is shattered. I mean, there's not really there aren't words to articulate the kind of heartbreak, the senseless loss. I can't even begin to fathom what Johnny and Matthew's families are going through, the destruction of lives in such a stupid, selfish way. And it's just been surreal to see, well, first the outpouring of love and support in memory of Johnny and Matthew, and just the fact that they were here. And, you know, we were watching Johnny play last season, and Blue Jackets fans were looking forward to him playing next season. And, you know, Monahan being on the team and talking about looking forward to reconnecting with him and raising sons together.
It just kept getting worse and worse. There were so many stories that just kept sort of piling on top, and every single one was more heartbreaking than the next.
Every piece of news made it somehow that much more tragic. There's nothing we can say that would properly articulate the kind of support and love and passion the entire hockey community and everyone who's heard this news has for the Gaudreau family and the families of Johnny and Matthew. But it is there, and as much as this shatters everyone's hearts, they are here for Johnny and Matthew's families. We're going to link to a fundraiser for Matthew's family especially. He won't be able to meet his son, but it's for Matthew's wife to be able to kind of move forward with some financial freedom. So we'll link that. But other than that, our thoughts, our hearts, and condolences go out to the family, friends, and loved ones of Johnny Gaudreau and Matthew Gaudreau. No easy way to transition into the podcast, so let's just do it. Folks, welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast, here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, and lots more. I'm one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast, we are going to be talking to you first about a contract that was signed by Carolina, which is interesting for a couple of reasons. First, the salary cap just got that much more complicated. Evan, put this as a tick in your column for why your argument to get rid of it. I never thought I'd say that. And on the other hand, why that's potentially interesting for Detroit as a comparable contract for the Red Wings to consider as they are looking at Lucas Raymond and his contract. We're also going to be talking about other small news, the Red Wings potentially being interested in Max Pacioretty, updates for Kasper and Michael Brandsegg-Nygard in their Olympic efforts, Red Savage becoming the captain of MSU, and the PTOs have started to roll in. We'll also be getting into some NHL news here and there. Zadina is a name that's floating around again. It was expected that this was going to happen this time of year. Some test rules in the AHL, and then other odds and ends before we jump into overtime. Before all that, I want to let you know that the Winged Wheel Podcast is proudly brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. If you want to support the show, you get access to bonus overtime episodes, which record right after these main ones, as well as bonus off-season episodes. You also get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord, and you're automatically entered into all of our giveaways. For example, we give away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game, the vast majority of them going directly to our Patreon supporters. So again, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Let's jump right in with Seth Jarvis. The Carolina Hurricanes and RFA Seth Jarvis agreed on terms on a new 8-year, $63.2 million contract. And that's, again, interesting for a couple of reasons. Because, one, Seth Jarvis, in terms of production or where he fits in on the team and his RFA situation, that's about as close of an analog to Lucas Raymond's situation as you're going to find right now at this moment in time. It's also interesting because his cap hit isn't going to be the simple calculation of 63.2 divided by 8, which would be about a $7.9 million contract. According to Puckpedia, that AAV is going to be 7.420087. So just about 480 grand lower than the expected AAV. Why is that? Seth Jarvis has elected to willingly defer salary to we'll call it year 9, quote unquote, even though the contract is only 8 years, where he'll receive that salary in year 9. He gets that after the contract is over. And in return, Carolina saves on his cap hit. Now, it's a little bit of a complicated thing to understand, so I'm going to link to Puckpedia's new deferred compensation calculator, and they have an explanation on Jarvis and everything like that. But credit to Sean Ferris, who did some calculations on basically the NHL uses a formula or an interest rate or a calculation to determine what the future value of the money deferred would be. To put it very simply, and I know I'm not the smartest person in the world to be explaining this, and there's people who are doing it much better, but money now is worth more than money later. So what the implication is that because Jarvis is earning this money in the future, they are counting against the cap the value of that money in the future as opposed to right now. So it is still all technically factored into his cap hit, but the cap hit is lower today because Jarvis doesn't actually earn that money in the future. And, if you say $15 million today versus $15 million in 9 years, well, $15 million today is worth more. It's just how it goes. So it's still incredibly advantageous for Carolina to do this. It's just the mathematical and financial implication here is that it's still technically factored into the AAV, but obviously Carolina is all for this. So just want to clarify that, and do check out those links to the calculator and the explanation for more information. So a very, very, very little known rule that you can defer money. It hasn't been used very often. We're talking a handful of times, but this is the biggest kind of use case for it that we've seen so far. We know Eric Tulsky likes to think about things analytically and do things obviously in a really smart way. And this has his fingerprints all over it. So it's cool to see Carolina dust off the pages of a part of the CBA that no one really was looking at before. Let's get into the deferral part. Does this set a new standard? Why aren't more teams using it? And are they going to moving forward?
Probably not, because there's almost no benefit to the player on this one. Not that there's no benefit, but very, very little benefit, because players, you see all these signing bonuses on contracts because players want their money up front. They want it now. It's human nature. Why get something in 9 years when I can have it now? Yeah, it's good for the team on the AAV, and obviously there are more than a few cases of players taking a haircut on their contract to lower their AAV and help build a winning team, and et cetera, et cetera. And this could be a way of doing that. So I am curious if teams are going to use it a little heavier in negotiation, but it's going to be a hard sell for most players to kick that much money down the road.
The example that everyone's thinking of outside of the NHL is Shohei Ohtani with the Dodgers, where he deferred an astronomical amount of money. And to the point where people were making jokes of is the MLB is the Earth even going to be around then? And that's to help him A, get paid a ton, but also B, make sure that the Dodgers can build a winning team around him. And anyone who knows anything about the Angels, you can't blame him for thinking that way. But it's a different ball game, no pun intended. Shohei, he has $1 billion, million, $1 trillion coming in because A, he's in LA in the MLB, and B, he is the biggest star in Japan, and C, he has all this advertising money coming in. The NHL stars don't make that much. They're, as much as you want to say they're still all multimillionaires, and a lot of them, or most of them, whatever we're talking about, are, in terms of pro sports, they're pretty close to the bottom rung of that ladder. And so, yeah, you're right, Brad. They're not going to be interested in deferring money. The only way the team can really make the case is to say, hey, we'll up the money. And so in the end, with some smart investing, and as long as you work with your agent and financial advisors, you'll actually come out ahead, and we can build a winning roster around you. So there's ways to do it, but I think you're right. This is why we haven't seen it as much, because why would NHL players defer money?
It's so complicated, and trying to explain that to a 21-year-old, my eyes are glazing over. They're like, I want money now because I'm Seth Jarvis and I want another jet ski or whatever he wants. It would be very difficult to sell them on that. And at the end, they probably don't see it as a positive. So if this was a way for both parties to sort of get what they want at the end of the contract, then I guess it works for both player and team. I don't see why a lot of players would ever want to do this, but I can see benefits, I suppose.
And we all know young, rich athletes who have really done all athletics and not a lot of education, things like that. Famously good with their money and famously very patient. And also it's the NHL, they don't make money right out of their first contract in terms of like big bucks. Obviously, 750, 850 grand, whatever, is nothing to scoff at, but it's not like the NFL or the NBA where these guys are making a ton of money. So yeah, they're going to be eager for their dollars. Now that the dam has broken, so to speak, I do wonder if you're going to see GMs get a little bit more creative with this and push. I think Frank Saravalli made a great point. Like you look at the Draisaitl situation. If you have any kind of inkling that Draisaitl or McDavid or any of those big number guys are into this, you have to push at that. It just makes too much sense for the team to not.
Well, we always talk about the advantages the wealthy teams have in a no cap world. This could be an advantage in the hard cap world because there are teams out there in the NHL where if, $5, $6, $7, $8, $9, $10 million of a hypothetical Leon Draisaitl contract get pushed into 1 year on top of whatever your actual salary is going to be for that season, they might not be able to absorb that, at least not comfortably. So would a Utah or a Minnesota be keen on that? Maybe. You look at the Leafs, the Rangers, that could be a competitive advantage for them where they'd be like, yeah, we'll give you all this money and we're going to defer this astronomical amount of money or whatever the max allowed is to bring their cap hit down as low as possible, whereas other teams couldn't do that. Because if the Leafs deferred, I don't even know if this is possible in the rules, but $25 million to a ninth year. How many teams in the league would even consider that? And that could be their big competitive advantage because if now they're offering a contract that's worth $10 to $15 million more than the other teams because of that deferral, it would be smart of them for the teams that can stomach it.
I hope we don't see a lot of it because
I can't keep track of all that. I refuse.
I saw speculation and argument over what the actual number was. I saw Puckpedia's number and I'm like, that's what we're going with. $7,420,087 is the AAV, unless I hear otherwise. That is that. All right. Let's move on to why this is relevant to Lucas Raymond.
Simply because if you look at players around the NHL in terms of age, position, output, contract status, handedness, size, like you can keep going. There is no more comparable player in the NHL than Seth Jarvis to Lucas Raymond. Like same draft, same. Now Raymond has outproduced him a little bit, like not by a substantial amount, but obviously Jarvis has had more team success. You could argue Jarvis's numbers are as good as they are because of the team he plays on. But Raymond plays a more critical role on his team because there are less options around him. So I tend to think those things balance out. So, we've pointed to probably a half dozen contracts this summer that could come into play as comparables that either Raymond's agent or Yzerman are going to use as a baseline. I think this one's the ultimate baseline now because it's the most comparable player to him in the league.
And for the record, Seth Jarvis, 231 games, 64 goals, 82 assists for 146 points. Lucas Raymond, 238 games, 71 goals, 103 assists for 174 points. So Raymond has outproduced him, but pretty comparable. Now, that sets the floor in terms of the dollar value. So I think if you're looking at the floor, you don't think 7.4 whatever million, you think 7.9. Like you think the full, unless Raymond is willing to defer to, and then that's between Raymond and his agent and Steve Yzerman and God, whatever. We'll figure that out when it comes. If Yzerman can pull that off, amazing. Even better for the cap. The player gets his money. Fans have a team that has a little bit more cap space. Everybody wins. But for the sake of ease and for Evan not hitting me, we're not going to talk about deferrals. 7.9 is the floor. I don't think that's unexpected, but at the same time, I do think that is about where maybe the Red Wings are hoping to get him at on an 8-year deal. Like, I would not be surprised if the Red Wings were thinking high 7s rather than 8s for Lucas Raymond.
Yeah, the total dollar on this contract because of the deferral is what's likely to be relevant, because I think Jarvis got 63 mil and change over the life of the contract.
Yeah.
So you got to think then Raymond's probably looking, if I had to estimate, 65 to 70, which would put him just a bit over 8 a year. And I think that's about the estimation most people, most knowledgeable hockey people have been like that. Those have been the guesses for what Raymond's contract could look like at 8 years. So everything's lining up more or less to what most intelligent hockey people thought.
Now, does this also put a ceiling on Raymond in a way? Because, like, if Seth Jarvis is making 7.9, can Raymond ask for 8.5?
I think 8.5 would be the ceiling.
Right?
Like, you can look at the production and where the teams are and all the context around it and go, yeah, Raymond is worth more than Jarvis. Probably a very fair statement. But he's not so much more valuable than Jarvis that you're talking $750,000, $1 million per year. There's not that big of a gap between them.
Can Jarvis play center pretty easily?
He did in junior, but I don't think he ever has. In
maybe
the
not
NHL.
the NHL level. So I was almost going to say that might be the only claim there. But if Jarvis is making 7.9, this all kind of just points to like an 8.1, 8.2-ish number. That's kind of been what's floating around my head. And that would be, I think, I know the Red Wings they love to grind their RFAs. They like to keep the cap hits low, and I get that. But if Raymond's at, let's call it 8.25 or 8.3, how much higher can Seider really be then? Because then you get Seider under 9, and that to me would be, I'm not going to say a coup. It's a lot of money for two guys, but that's pretty reasonable for two guys.
That'd be very reasonable. And this is where I think the Dylan Larkin factor comes in, because I think Yzerman, whether he truly firmly believes it or it's just a negotiating ploy, probably for both these guys has said, you're not making more than our captain. So Raymond's not getting more than that in all likelihood now because of the Jarvis contract. And Yzerman's going to sit there and go, okay, here's our next two best players making, let's say, 8.2, 8.7. We'll negotiate in that window. And I think that's likely what's going to happen to Seider.
Agents must hate hearing the whole internal ceiling thing. Like, no one makes more than this guy. And they're just like, I don't care. Inflation is at like 4% a day and the cap has gone up 6%. Like, who cares?
How much does a banana cost? $20? You guys keep talking dollars. I keep thinking about term. Because if there's an internal ceiling, they'll say, that sounds great. We're only going to take 4 years then. Like, what makes you think that
the number changes so much? I don't like. I think if the player wants as much AAV as possible, they're going to go.
That's a big if. Well, for this contract, if they want the most AAV for this contract,
that's right. But then if they go shorter term, they're not getting those big bucks. They're essentially betting on themselves, and so that's
which
still a possibility.
Superstar RFAs or young players like to do. Well, I shouldn't say all of them, but we have seen an uptick in that in the NHL.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know. I just don't know where this is going, but I do agree with you guys on the number. But I think it's tough to say, like, are these the type of guys to bet on themselves, time the cap? It's hard to say.
I don't want to assign this sentiment to any player. Like, these are their jobs, and it's a different NHL than what we used to have. But you do also like to think, like, Raymond and Seider have been very upfront about saying, like, yeah, we want to be Red Wings for life. We want to be here. And so I don't think they're trying to milk the team for every dollar and make this an untenable situation. God knows that Steve Yzerman would make that uncomfortable because he would not take well to that in negotiations. I haven't really heard anything to indicate that there's a hard line on short term. So I'm working on the assumption that both parties are trying to make 8 years work.
Of course.
And it could be 7 and whatever. But first off, like for the term, they're not going to get walked right to unrestricted free agency. Like that's just a non-starter.
Yeah.
So that like middle term that's not going to happen. But if the guy wants to take a super short term or, RFA years +1, that's a big bet, and it's not really going to be well received. And the questions are going to be like, okay, you want to win. How badly do you want to win if you're trying to take in this much money? Now, the flip side of that, and we've talked about this quite a bit, is that Steve Yzerman could see advantages to a bridge because it frees up more AAV in the short term, but that cap space, is it actually useful in the long term? It's a whole different story. But to bring us back, on potential 8-year deals, I don't see this Jarvis comparable as some saving grace that's going to pull Raymond to be a super low number. But at the same time, I think it is pretty square with what a good AAV would be for Raymond, if that makes sense. Like if this brings him into the low 8s and kind of anchors him to that, I think that would be a good result.
That's going to be Steve Yzerman's hope in all likelihood.
So that's the comparison between Seth Jarvis and Lucas Raymond. And then by proxy, like I said, Lucas Raymond to Mo Seider, how much are those two married? It's not the same agent or agency. Actually, funny enough, Claude Lemieux, yes, that Claude Lemieux, I have to say that every time, is Mo Seider's agent. He's now Tim Stützle's agent. So Claude Lemieux collecting
all the German
stars, yeah. And that's because obviously he's going to get Tim Stützle over to Detroit eventually. That's going to be our conspiracy theory. And that is purely to antagonize Ottawa Senators fans. You know who you are.
And that's like 7 years down the road. We need to talk about short-term Germans here. How do we get Leon Draisaitl on the Red Wings next summer?
Come on, Claude. You want to have a coming back moment with the Red Wings fandom and win their hearts for the first time ever? I'll rewrite history if you get Draisaitl over to Detroit. Figure it out. So, if Seider is tethered at all to Raymond, then to me, this is potentially the chain reaction of how this could work out. And this is where I throw caution into my own face. This is galaxy braining it. Like, this is going too far down the road. Like I was saying, not the same agents, not the same agency. It is a silly assumption to assume they're tied together, but the team will want to put forward that notion because that's advantageous to them. That's Jarvis. Did you see you were telling me about his jet ski video?
He's the best.
Dude's rock, man.
I know. Just living the life up in Muskoka. Sends out the viral tweet on the Carolina Twitter account. All he says is, Carolina, we're back. And then just
rips
off he goes.
Hell yeah.
I love that.
All right, let's move on. The Red Wings, it was reported by Staples and The Athletic that they're one of the two teams potentially interested in Pacioretty, or at least the two reported teams, the other one being the Leafs. So Max Pacioretty, kind of in the journeyman phase of his career, and obviously that Achilles injury is going to be looming large for people. But is he an option as a PTO / let's see how things go, and if you are actually holding up, then you can add to this offense in a depth way kind of thing?
I'd be surprised to see him end up anywhere on a PTO just because of who he is and what he's done. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of teams because his last season was so bad, and because he's got the injury troubles, there's no way anybody's paying him any decent amount of money or term. He's probably going to be very close to a 1-year near league minimum deal. Sounds great for the Red Wings. Put him on the third line in that Thomas Vanek role that we always love to refer to. Sheltered scoring. If he doesn't work out, well, it's going to cost nothing. So who cares? You can bury the contract very, very easily if it goes sideways. If it even goes halfway well, that's the depth scoring that we've been looking at all summer going, where the hell is that going to come from? We have the top 6 that should score plenty, and then a bottom 6 that might not score at all. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Detroit. I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of teams. When you get a guy with that track record that's going to likely come in this cheap, risks be damned. It's an attractive option because, again, there is a reality here where he pops off for 20 goals again, which how many guys can you get that for like $1 million?
Whether or not he'll do it, I don't know. I've seen the kind of resounding opinion on him since he returned, and it's not been like, I don't think it's mean. It's just the reality of someone who goes through that kind of injury repeatedly. So I get the skepticism, but there's zero risk. Like you assess, it is what it is.
That's the whole argument. There is absolutely no downside if this goes sideways, because you can bury him and his entire every penny of what his likely cap hit is in the minors. And someone said he lives in Michigan in the offseason and his family's from around here. So it could be why Detroit is on his radar. This could be one of the things the agent's throwing it out there and Detroit's not actually interested. He's just trying to drum up some interest from Detroit.
Well, yeah. I mean, you got to read between the line on a lot of news, like the Zadina news. Oh, I'll just move that over to this segment. The whole Zadina thing is like, first it was PTO, and then it was he has as many as 3 clubs chasing him. And wow, yeah, that, probably to some degree, there's probably 1 or 2. And maybe the agent is just trying to drum up a $500,000 more or an extra year on the contract. So a lot of the times when you see that news, it's not false and you shouldn't discredit it or get mad at it, but you have to understand that a lot of it has a slant. Not all the time, but some of it.
It's got to pass the sniff test.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens with that. And again, it's PTO season to move forward. Austin Watson was signed as a PTO for the Red Wings, professional tryout. So preseason training camp, it's a warm body. It fits the rules on how many guys you have to have and veterans and all that kind of thing. It's not a contract, so nothing's guaranteed. You've seen PTOs turn into players before, but it's just a tryout for now. All right. Other Red Wings news. Red Savage named captain of Michigan State. Congrats to Red Savage. We had Red Savage on the show after he was drafted a little while back. So obviously we're always going to be rooting for him. So congratulations to him on stepping up into that captaincy role. And then elsewhere in Red Wings news, Marco Kasper and Michael Brandsegg-Nygard have not qualified for the Olympics with Austria and Norway, respectively. They did not make it in, unfortunately. It was cool to see the highlights and seeing them play, but they did not make it in.
It was an uphill battle for both of them. From everything I saw, they both played very well for the division they were in terms of the Olympic qualifications. Selfishly, it's probably better they don't go to the Olympics. Just give himself a chance to rest, especially MBN, who's Skellefteå to Olympic qualifiers to Detroit, probably back to Skellefteå. 2-3 month stretch is going to take a lot out of him. So having a mid-season break might be very, very useful for him.
Okay. We are going to take a quick break to hear about the sponsors of the Winged Wheel podcast, and we're going to be back to talk about NHL news. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you have something in mind that you'd love to learn? Maybe you finally want to grab a pair of skates and pick up hockey, or do what I did and learn how to golf as an adult. Maybe you want to learn how to code so you can get into the world of sports analytics. Therapy can be a great tool to reconnect with your sense of wonder because your learn new things era can come at any age. It can help you build effective time management skills, learn to overcome fear of failure, or even assist in identifying what you want to do that would make you most happy. It's not just for those who have experienced major trauma. Therapy is for anyone looking to better themselves overall. If you've been considering therapy, we highly recommend giving BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, making it convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you need to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and you'll be matched with a licensed therapist. Plus, you can switch therapists anytime at no additional charge if you need to. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/wingedwheel today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/wingedwheel. With summer in the rearview mirror and the hockey season coming at us fast, now's the perfect time to save time and money when it comes to your dinner routine. Skip the meal planning and grocery store lines and cut down on food waste with HelloFresh's convenient doorstep delivery and pre-measured ingredients. No more endless searching for recipes that are actually worth cooking or spending a ton of money on bulk ingredients when you only need a small amount. With HelloFresh, everything you need to make delicious meals comes right to your door, pre-portioned and fresh. Plus, the included step-by-step recipe cards make cooking simple. My wife and I actually used HelloFresh even before they partnered with the Winged Wheel podcast. For us, we obviously loved how everything was perfectly prepared and ready to cook with the instructions, but more than that, we had a blast trying new dishes we never would have cooked otherwise. It's helped us explore new foods and cuisines without having to spend a fortune at a restaurant or worry about not knowing where to start. For free breakfast for life, go to hellofresh.com/free winged wheel. One free breakfast item per box while subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to hellofresh.com/free winged wheel. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. Welcome back. Before we jump into NHL news, let's actually talk about the Athletics' recent, they called it pipeline ranking, so effectively a U23 rankings, where the Red Wings came in at about number 14. So just about middle of the pack, just a hair above that across the entire NHL. So the player rankings were as follows. And again, this is U23, which is why Lucas Raymond is here. But Lucas Raymond was, of course, named number 1 in these rankings. Nate Danielson, number 2. Simon Edvinsson, number 3. Axel Sandin-Pellikka, number 4. Number 5, Marco Kasper. Number 6, Michael Brandsegg-Nygard. Number 7, Sebastian Cossa. 8 is Carter Mazur. 9 is Shai Buium. 10 is Trey Augustine. And then there's a bunch of guys named as has a chance to play in terms of Wallinder, Betcher, Bachelnikov, etc. So thoughts on where the Red Wings came in the order that they were listed?
I feel like the order of how they listed out the top 10 prospects was fine. I'm not going to nitpick as long as it was reasonably close, and in my opinion, it was very reasonably close. The overall ranking, I think, probably came in a touch lower than I was expected, but not much, because we've talked about this time and time again, and when you look at these rankings as a whole, and you go to the teams ahead of them, you see very obviously what the Red Wings are missing, and that's a superstar. There's no Connor Bedard, there's no Macklin Celebrinis, there's none of those types of players in the Red Wings system. Lucas Raymond, very good. Probably already a star player. But I think, especially in our fan base, because of the position we're in, the difference between a star and a superstar gets lost a lot. And unfortunately, in today's NHL, that matters. That distinction matters a lot in terms of how many you need, the quality of star you have in order to compete. I think the Red Wings have maybe 2 to 3 players in their U23 rankings that could be considered stars one day. Not just very, very good. A second line center is not a star. We all love Nate Danielson.
Are you saying Nate Danielson can't be a star or won't be a star? Because I think he fits in the mold of could be a star.
I was literally just about to get into this disclaimer. There's always the possibility every hockey player on earth develops a new skill, a new talent, whatever, and just takes off. When you do these rankings, when you assess these rankings, when you do your own projections, you have to go by the most likely outcome. There's always going to be rule breakers, but if you're sitting here banking on the exceptions, you're screwed. Like, that's just how prospecting goes. More prospects are likely to flat out bust than they are exceed expectations, to exceed most likely scenario. I think Nate Danielson's most likely scenario is to be a very good second line center, which is not a star. Could he get a bit more playmaking, get a harder shot, skate a little faster, and all of a sudden he's like in that low 1C territory? Absolutely. Same with Simon Edvinsson. I don't think Simon Edvinsson is a number 1 defenseman. His toolkit leads you to believe there's at least a chance Sebastian Cossa could be a number 1 goalie. I think Raymond is a star. I think Danielson and Edvinsson have a chance. I think Cossa has a chance. I think Sandin-Pellikka has a chance. I really need to emphasize the words there, has a chance, which means is not likely. Again, I can't emphasize that enough. If one of them turns into a legit Lucas Raymond star level player, we should all be doing backflips. That's a fantastic outcome. Again, most likely outcome is that none of them will be. But where the Red Wings lack superstar options, or even a lot of star options, they make up for by probably having one of the, if not the deepest U23 rankings in the NHL. So you got to take the good with the bad. A lot of middle 6 to top 6 forward potentials, a lot of mid pair, possible top pair defense options. no Dylan Larkin level players, no even Mo Seider level players. Like it's the reality of the situation. You miss the draft lottery often enough. And the one thing that I've actually been circling back on a lot is they were bad in a very bad run of drafts. Like they did not bottom out at the right time in terms of what the strongest drafts in the NHL have been in the last 20 years. So sometimes circumstance just gets you, and that's where the Red Wings are sitting right now.
I think the label superstar is a very tight label. Like that's a narrow lane. And so when you say Lucas Raymond is a star and superstar is a question, and that's a debate that people have to have, I actually agree with you because I think superstar is a very narrow tier. I think the world of Lucas Raymond. I'm his biggest fan. And I think, yeah, there's a chance he develops into a superstar, but he's in that tier of players who is a star player, and there's still a separation between those stars and like the elite superstars. And so I agree with you on that. But I also look at other teams on this list, and I think they have players where I think their projection, even though they're very high-end players, can you say they're going to be superstar prospects? Like, yeah, the teams with the phenoms coming in and the ones who got the Russians who fell down the board, I get that, why they're a little bit higher up. But then you look at, Carolina, for example, or you look at other teams where they have good players or players where a lot of them might be around that Raymond level where you're like, oh, this could be an 80-point per year guy. Well, great. The Red Wings have that, and he already is one. Up there, So to me, I'm not saying the Red Wings should be top 5, but I think there are other teams in and around that, like, call it 8 to 14 range where a lot of it could be interchangeable.
Yeah, 100%. I even listened to Corey Pronman on his podcast after, and I think Max questioned him about it, and he compared Jarvis and Raymond directly because he had Carolina just out of Detroit, and he just plainly said, yeah, they're comparable, but I just like Jarvis more, which is what's going to happen in these rankings. If you just prefer this player a little bit, it's going to bump them ahead in the rankings, and that's fine. I don't know if I would have had Detroit up in the top 10, but yeah, they were like a fringy top 10 team in my mind. So if you slotted them anywhere from 9 to 12, I would have felt that was about right. Again, some of those teams in the top 10, they've been so bad for so long.
Yeah.
They've just had so many top 5 picks that there was no reality where the Red Wings were going to be able to keep up with them in a ranking like this.
I think for us who do very deep dives into the NHL and prospects and whatnot, this list is not surprising. I think if you were to ask a generalist, or I hate to say fair weather fan, but someone who's more of a surface level person, the Red Wings missing the playoffs 9 straight years and are ranked 14th in a under 23 pipeline ranking probably isn't that great. That probably doesn't inspire them confidence to start going to buy tickets and watching this team.
It's also worth noting, Mo Seider just missed the cutoff for this ranking. If you plug Mo Seider into this ranking, how high up do they shoot? Probably now you're in the top 5-6 range. He just aged out to be qualified for the list.
And like Brad said, it's just circumstance. Like, yeah, the Red Wings missed on draft picks before Yzerman came in, but they also made the absolute most they could have of the Seider and Raymond picks. And it was just they got no lottery luck, and these other teams had, Zeev Buium fall to them, and they had Demidov fall to them, and they won Celebrini right when they tanked. Like, it's just different circumstance and terrible luck. You
don't need to explain it to me. I understand what you're saying. I'm talking about the people who want tickets when the team is good. So when they see rankings like this and they're not as plugged into prospects, they're looking at it like, oh, here we go, another sign of mediocrity.
And to further your point, I don't even think it's just like, fair weather fans or people who aren't tapped into the Red Wings. We've talked about this. We're connected with people across the league who we respect their opinions a lot, but the reality is they lose sight of the historical context of the Red Wings over the past, 10 years, 12 years. And so for them, they say, oh, here are the numbers. They've missed the playoffs all these years. It's an abject failure. It's not good to miss the playoffs all these years. That is a failure. But at the same time, everything that Brad and I just stated and that Evan said was obvious is still true. And that point is missed. And so it's really funny because we do this podcast during the season twice a week, or even once a week during the offseason. Like, we don't take a break. We're talking about the Red Wings all the time. And so some people think that we're like just constantly hammering the Red Wings because they've been through a rebuild, or they're like, you're nitpicking. But the moment national media starts to hammer the Red Wings, but for the wrong things, we're like, hey, no. That's our job, and you're doing it wrong. Go away. But legitimately, like, I think that subjectivity is, I see where it's coming from, but it's missing a lot of the nuance here.
Yeah, I will still be very critical of Yzerman's drafting outside of the first round. I think there was a lot of missed opportunities there in terms of their philosophy hurting them by skipping on players like Logan Stankoven just because they didn't draft players like that. This year was a refreshing relief where they actually took some swings on guys like that. But you go back through their first rounds, obviously it's way too early to say anything about the NBN draft, but Nate Danielson, how many players were picked after him that you could make a real strong argument they should have picked? I would argue for maybe two, and one of them they still drafted.
Yeah, that's what, like,
maybe Benson, maybe Sandin Pellikka. Okay, you're happy with that pick. If you're only arguing about one or two guys drafted behind your player, you made a good pick. Marco Kasper is, let's call a spade, a very, very uninspiring top 10 pick in a typical draft. How many players picked behind him are you taking? It wasn't a good draft. There were not a whole lot of better options behind him. Look at Edvinsson. Yeah, you can easily say Wyatt Johnston now, but he was not ranked top 15 in anybody's rankings. He didn't play that year. So nobody's going to fault anybody for missing on Wyatt Johnston. You know, you look at where Edvinsson was picked. How many players behind him are you going to take over him? Not many. Kosa, same thing. Obviously, Seider and Raymond were grand slam, no doubt, best players available when they were picked. Like, the Red Wings have done a good job in the first round. They just did not have superstar level options available to them. And that's, again, they got bad. They didn't win any lotteries. And of these drafts they were truly bad in, these aren't these like historical 2015 drafts where you're finding superstars well into the teens and 20s. Like, it's just circumstance killed them. And then you look at the pipeline rankings that a lot of organizations are putting out, and you're like, wow, how are we only, a mid-teens? And then you run through the other teams and you go, yeah, I get it.
It just shows what some draft luck and a deep draft does to a franchise.
And honestly, like, I'm not trying to let anyone off the hook for, who's going to pan out for second, third round picks. I think that the jury is still out. I still think it's too early to start deciding on that. And I know people are of different minds. Like you said, Brad, like what you think the philosophy should be. And we all like this most recent draft, but what could Yzerman control? Definitely not the draft lottery. And if as a fan, you could pick one thing for them to do right, is first round picks. Because imagine no lottery luck, and the years where you got no lottery luck, it pushed you outside of any of the kind of needle moving players in all likelihood. And then imagine they whiffed on Seider and Raymond. And,
we've been talking about
my God,
Will Smith and
Connor Bedard. Yeah.
That's what we would be doing.
Yeah.
Maybe. Who knows?
No, but that's the thing. Like, it's just, if you can ask for one thing, then I'm glad at least that worked out for the Red Wings. So all this to say, like, these kinds of rankings, I think U23 it's a good bar to measure with, but at the same time, it's a little bit complicated for Detroit because Raymond and just missing the cutoff Seider, those are two of their most important players. So it makes it a bit fuzzy. Detroit's in a little bit of an atypical situation. And as always, it's subjective. It's up to personal opinion. What's actually correct? What's most convenient to our argument at the time? That's just the general rule of thumb.
As always.
Of course. Okay, let's jump into some NHL news. Jeremy Swayman, still unsigned, and the rumors and stuff are starting to float around, and him going through the arbitration process, it's anything but simple. Like in the past, it's anything but simple between him and the Bruins. I don't know, man. What's going to happen on that one?
I don't know. Something I like picture in my head right now is, he who lives in a glass house cannot throw stones is sitting here with Raymond and Seider still unsigned. But yeah, he's got all the leverage even without the arbitration because they just traded their Vezina winning goalie and declared him the goalie of the future. And now he's sitting there probably saying, I'm your goalie of the future. Pay me like it.
Yeah. What are you going to do? Like lose Ullmark and then say, yeah, Swayman, we're not going to make you feel rewarded. And yeah, not being in the arbitration process this year doesn't mean that he still doesn't feel that process from last time around. Like I have yet to hear about an arbitration process where the player came out saying, wow, what a refreshing experience where my employer put out statistical and video evidence as to why I shouldn't be paid as much as I think I'm worth. It's just not the case. And most of the time, the player and the team sour on each other, and then the player's gone in X number of years, even after the award is granted.
And also, Swayman's agent's probably not dumb. He knows Boston's window isn't open for much longer. So can they really afford to go into October, November, possibly without their starting goalie? And there's a lot of analytics out there that actually back up the fact that Ullmark and Swayman weren't the result of strong defense for the Bruins. The Bruins put up good goals against numbers because of their goaltending, not the defense. They were actually giving up a fair amount of chances. So he's got a lot of leverage right now.
Swayman put out a pretty flag in the ground type comment maybe the past week too, saying, I've done my homework. I've looked at the business side. I understand my comparables. I know what I'm worth. He's dug in. I don't think they're going to be getting a hometown discount from Jeremy Swayman. He knows where he's at. He understands it. And I don't think they can really play hardball with the guy.
No, and that's the risk you run, right? Like I was talking about Barry Trotz last episode and him being mad that Askarov asked for the trade publicly. It's like, if you're going to sign UC Saros to an 8-year deal, which is the right thing to do, and they got him at a great number in my mind, then that's what you do to Askarov. And if you're going to put Jeremy Swayman through the arbitration process and you're going to go through that and not get that settled beforehand, then you're going to sour future contract negotiations.
Yep.
This is such a human sport on and off the ice. And God, we know the whole like inner circle, insular, buddy, coach, son kind of mentality this whole sport has. And if that relationship's broken, it's broken.
And like, it all depends on how those arbitration conversations go, right? Like you've heard some horror stories. You see the history of where guys go through arbitration, then they don't usually re-sign with the team. It would be really tough as just a person sort of getting ripped apart in those arbitration meetings. And then a few years later, they come back to you. They're like, we love you.
Yeah.
We need you here. It would be very difficult for almost everyone to like put that aside and compartmentalize it and not try and just rake them over the coals.
He's got to be mad at that UC Saros contract because that came in. Like you look at what other high-end goalies commanded, and then UC Saros commands a contract that comes in at 7.74. Like the fact that that even starts with the 7 to me was wild. And I'm sure Swayman was like, geez, man, like,
come on.
You couldn't do what Bobrovsky did? Like, give me a little bit of a break here.
You think he's holding out, hoping that Shesterkin signs his extension with the Rangers before they finalize that contract?
I don't even think he's holding out hoping. I think he's holding out until that happens. He's probably playing chicken. Those two are probably playing chicken.
Shesterkin signs an $11 million 8-year extension with the Rangers. Swayman just looks at Sweeney. That.
Copy paste, please.
You know what? I'll do you one better. I'll do 10. Because I don't know, man. And again, like I used to think when it was as bad as it possibly could be for the Red Wings last season, like I thought, you got to get the goalie signed. You got to get the goalie signed, and whatever you have to do to make that work, you do it. And if that means Shesterkin's available and you spend 10 something million, maybe up to 11 million, you do it. And then you see the Saros contract and you're like,
why can't it be us?
I would just hate to spend $30 million more or whatever of the lifetime of the contract when they have Saros for that amount.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, it's going to be interesting. Boston reminds me of like what Tampa Bay has had to do. Like still a force, and it's not as easy as it was during your heyday, but you want to stay a competitive team. You can't lose Ullmark and Swayman. You guys see Nick Cousins signed in Ottawa?
Fitting.
He also said he is going to try and push them to the next level, which is hilarious to hear.
Look, Nick Cousins is easily the most hated player on the ice from other NHL players and by the fans over the past season. I don't hate the pickup for any team that grabs him. Like, he had utility. You saw with the Panthers. He was useful out there. Hate to see it. But, man, Ottawa's going to be between everyone who isn't a Senators fan hating Brady Tkachuk when they play him, and then you add Perron to that mix, and now Nick Cousins, like, they're going to be...
If it makes the Battle of Ontario all that more electric, I think it's great for hockey, but when they play the Red Wings, it's going to be pure hatred.
It might actually be... nothing has proven to be able to kill Twitter yet, despite some best efforts. That might actually destroy Twitter, the Red Wings Senators online war.
That's going to be the most absolute out-of-pocket mid-off we've ever seen in hockey history.
The level of toxicity for a sub-$1 million player is going to be unrivaled.
I can see it now. Final game of the season. The Red Wings beat Ottawa in a 3-2 overtime thriller. There's 217 minutes and penalties, and that breaks the tie. So the Red Wings finish 10th and the Senators finish 11th.
We should be so lucky. All right. We didn't actually get to this last episode, but amidst the whole kind of panic from Edmonton, I don't want to call it panic, when they were deciding whether or not to match Broberg and Holloway, they acquired Vasily Podkolzin for a 4th-round pick from Vancouver. It was Ottawa's 4th-round pick for next season, but Vancouver is the one who traded it. So Podkolzin no longer is with the Canucks and is added in Edmonton. I like that bet for the Oilers. They have space for him, or at the very least, they're going to need that kind of depth if he has a role to play in the NHL, which is to be determined. I thought that was a shrewd move.
That was a great move for the Oilers. Again, we talk about no risk trades with upside. His contract is nothing. The acquisition cost was basically nothing. If he turns out to be anything half decent, it's a steal. Again, what's the value of a 4th-round pick? A player that's sub 10% likely to make the NHL? You know Podkolzin can play in the NHL, so you're already getting good value. If this guy pops off 15, 20 goals playing down your lineup, it's a grand slam of a trade.
The AHL Board of Governors has mandated a cut-resistant neck protection for all players and on-ice officials beginning this next season. So that, to me, signals a next step as this is going to eventually be coming to the NHL. These rules often come to the AHL first, where it's not tested, but kind of tested. And then as long as nothing goes awry, then the NHL knows the waters are clear and they can move forward with it. So I think that's common sense, especially after what we saw tragically previous.
You would think, but the sport of hockey is very slow to evolve. At least it's one step.
Yeah, and you got to make sure it's comfortable, and the player, like, players are so particular about equipment, as we know with Brad. Like, it has to be comfortable. And I know Wallman tried some stuff with the Red Wings and switched, I think, different products and then from using it to not. But as long as the players are comfortable with it, then down the line, we're going to think, oh man, I can't believe they never had that. All right. Before we jump into overtime, we first wanted to pass along our condolences. This was an announcement for the Red Wings. The Red Wings were deeply saddened to learn of the passing of former team masseur Sergei Manatsakanov. Sergei was a member of the 1997 Stanley Cup championship team that brought the first Stanley Cup to Hockeytown in 42 years. So we'd like to pass on our condolences to Sergei's friends and family. Okay, let's move into overtime on this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast. Overtime is brought to you by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast if you want to support the show. The bonus overtime episodes, the bonus off-season episodes, the Discord, the giveaways, all that and lots more. You allow us to do things like host Winged Wheel Podcast nights at the LCA in partnership with the Detroit Red Wings. Some tickets still available. Go to wingedwheelpodcast.com/Red Wings or the link in the description to get your tickets. You also allow us to support the Jamie Daniels Foundation. You allow us to produce other great content like Expected by Whom, hosted by Prashant Iyer and Sean Shapiro. And you allow us to bring on Max Bultman as a contributor to the Winged Wheel Podcast, which we're very excited by. So again, patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast. Let's take some questions from our patrons. This first one here from 155 Taters. They say, prospect question, Nate Danielson finished 49th in WHL scoring with 67 points in 54 games. Andre Betcher finished 13th in WHL scoring with 96 points in 58 games. Betcher outproduced Danielson by a significant margin. Why is Danielson the top prospect in the system while Betcher is a third-round long shot? Is it the birthday difference, a late bloomer thing?
Exactly that. Betcher is older, played on a top line. It's hard to emphasize how much 1 year around that age matters, but it matters a lot.
When I was playing, I was a small kid. I think you were a small kid too, Brad. And when you're a small kid and you stay a small kid while the kids around you are hitting puberty, it feels like you're playing against men. And imagine that at an even higher level, like where these guys aren't just taller, but they also weigh 185 pounds and you're trying to eat up to 140. Like it is a massive difference. So physically you can dominate. And it actually it's hard for prospecting because is a guy producing a lot because he's that talented, or is he producing a lot because he has a man's frame at a young age and is able to just bully his way through the ice? So that would be why. The Dandy Man Can says, thank you, Brad and Evan, for putting up with Ryan to make the greatest Red Wings podcast out there.
You're welcome.
Hold on. I can suffer a joke at my expense, and I will hear the positive Evan comments. I don't like the celebration of Brad. That makes me queasy. That's unnatural.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. I don't like it either.
Is this you, Brad?
You think I can use a computer?
No.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Great point, old man. Well, Zadina looking at a PTO, do you think he regrets leaving the Wings? I feel like he was given bad advice because players with his archetype, with way better resumes than him, have trouble getting contracts. Pius Suter and Tatar waited a long time trying to get term and neither were successful. Do you think the NHL undervalues those types of players, and did the Red Wings mess Zadina's development up? Sure, it would be nice to have Evan Bouchard behind Seider. Appreciate the most, Ryan. I just have to butter the two cavemen up first. Otherwise, it's in 1 year and out the other. Oh, he knows the formula. That's great.
Now I'm being attacked.
That's right.
What?
So for the record, Zadina actually went against the advice of the people around him, like including his agent. You don't walk away from $4 to $5 million, whatever it was left on his contract. And do you think he regrets it? Only he can say. Financially, you'd think, yeah. Because this isn't working out in his favor, and the bet with the San Jose Sharks, where he would have the best opportunity possible, hasn't worked out. So, to some degree, you think he does regret it.
I also don't think the Red Wings did him any favors in the development category. That seems to have been that was a very obvious problem in Detroit for a while. That looks like it is getting better.
But even when he got up, like, he got near the net and then he wouldn't do anything. Like, was that Red Wings development or was that just him?
Oh, it's both. Like, there was a lot of useful tools that Filip Zadina still had that you could have turned him into a pretty effective player. Maybe not a 30-goal scorer. Goal scoring clearly wasn't going to be his thing at the NHL level, but we saw lots of hustle. We saw transition. We saw flashes of playmaking. Like, there was a base there that I'm not saying this guy would have been worthy of a 6th overall pick, but you could have got a useful player out of him, and it just didn't happen. And again, the Red Wings have a stretch there of years where there were a lot of guys they probably could have got something out of and just didn't because of, a lot of reasons.
Chimp Given Nutgets says, sorry I'm late to the salary cap discussion. I was tied up vandalizing Evan's yacht in the French Riviera. I hope he likes dark blue maple leaves. Parody is about minimizing talent gaps. I would argue that was his decoy yacht. You were fooled. I would argue talent availability and development are bigger problems in the league's compensation structure. The overall depth of the talent pool, especially as it relates to budding stars and superstars, seems pretty shallow compared to the NFL. The time to return on an NHL pick is also crazy long. Most NFL teams expect round 1 picks to start immediately and contribute, and to get talent in the next 2 to 3 rounds that can start the draft year or the year after. In the NHL, drafting someone with the expectation of immediate payback seems rare. Getting any kind of reliable contribution at all seems to fall off a cliff after the first half of the first round. The question, do you think the talent development system is broken? And if you do, what short-term actions do you think the NHL could and should take to improve it? I appreciate your continued excellence, fellas. Keep the great content coming. Thanks.
Disagree. I don't love a lot of old school hockey mindsets in terms of developing prospects, but the NFL and NHL are not comparable. Outside of quarterbacks, the average NFL career, you're lucky to get 5 to 10 years out of a guy. Like, you get 10 years out of the absolute superstars where, how many 4th line grinders in the NHL can hang on for 10 plus years? So in the NFL, there's jobs available every year because of the turnover, because of how physically demanding that sport is, and guys just can't hang on for as long. And then you factor in a 53-man roster versus a 23-man roster. Even more opportunities available. Then you look at the age for the NFL draft. Most of those guys are coming out at 21, 22, 23 years old because they declare when they're ready for the draft. Whereas the NHL is 17, 18 years old. That's when you're getting drafted. So the NFL has higher turnover, bigger rosters, and the draft is at an older age. So the NHL just cannot be compared to the NFL. Now, I am a believer. I don't think it's ever going to work out. I would like to see a 19 or a 20-year-old draft for the NHL. I think there's more benefit to that. But when you get into labor laws and money and all that, never going to happen. And I understand that. That's why I never fight that fight, because there's too many reasons not to. But yeah, just completely different circumstances. It's almost impossible to truly compare them against each other.
How crazy would it be if players could declare for the draft? It's like once you're 17, you can declare for the draft. Like, I don't know if that would radically change a lot, but I'm not sure on that when I think about it.
Basically, if you're like a star player, you can come in.
You'd want to declare as soon as possible, right? So you start your earning potential. But there might be some guys who want to mature a little bit more. It might not make sense in certain draft years when other guys might be declaring. It's a good thought experiment, I suppose.
I think it's just, I think they're too small. Like, I think by and large, like as a 17-year-old, talent-wise, yeah, there were 17-year-olds at the top of the draft who are better talent-wise than a lot of NHL players. They'll also get trucked on the ice, right? So, like, what are you really going to do other than go back to your, CHL team or go back to Europe? The AHL is probably like that. You could float by, but the physical risk to me is, I think, what stops that from being the case. Anyhow, moving on. Jack Enthrolato says, congrats, gentlemen. You've all done it. All three of your imaginary children are hockey savants and are locks for the first 3 rounds of the draft the same year. Let's say 2025 for fun. Not only that, but through cunning and trickery, you've hacked the draft lottery system, so the 3 of you get to decide which teams each of your children goes to. Now, you sit together in a dank, dark room and must plan which teams your children play on, deciding what's best for their careers, knowing the NHL can't stop you. Do you put them on the best team? Do you put them on the worst team and let them rebuild a dynasty? Go to Winnipeg because you feel bad for Winnipeg. Get them in the winged wheel, even though they'll be slow-rolled and won't play in the NHL until they're 26. Thanks for the podcast.
Vegas. Don't care about the kids. This is for me.
Yeah. My first and emotional answer is the Detroit Red Wings. And then it's the Tampa Bay Lightning or the Florida Panthers.
Believe it or not, my brain went to warm weather, no state income tax.
Yep.
Look, kid.
Yep.
I don't want it to pay for a summer vacation home. I want to go to yours.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. But yeah, the winged wheel would be awesome.
Yeah, the Red Wings would be choice number 1. And then I am, with Evan, I am selecting the next locales based on weather, taxes, and weather.
Theodore K. Mullen says, a few quick one-timers, Datsuk or Zetterberg?
Datsuk.
I'm such a big Datsuk guy. And I love Hank, but Datsuk.
Like, are we talking about who's our favorite or who's
I don't know. I don't have all the rules, Brad.
Okay, we're going by favorites. Zetterberg.
Stevie or Sergey?
Stevie.
This
is like asking to pick between my 2 children, but I'll go Stevie.
Hold on. Based on what you said earlier, I think you could right now. Probert or McCarty?
Probert.
I got to go Probert here too.
McCarty got the cups with him.
Yeah, that's fair. Lyon or Bernier? Oh, I'm such a big Bernier guy.
Me too.
I love Lyon, but Bernier is so
got
undercelebrated.
A special spot.
Yeah, Bernier was criminally underrated in his time with Detroit.
And he also recognized how great of a hockey player Nelson Mandela was.
God.
Oh, God. I'm laughing. McDavid or McKinnon?
McDavid.
Oh, yeah.
It sucks because McKinnon's great. Travis or Jason Kelsey? Whichever one's going to give me some of that $100 million podcast money.
Yeah, exactly.
How do I sign up for that?
Holy.
Jason. Screw the Chiefs.
Yeah. I like the underappreciated, but when he's gone, you miss him positions in the NFL. So I'm going to go Jason.
I'll go Travis, just in case we get Taylor Swift on the podcast.
We've been trying to book her in forever, but our schedule's
She's
been a
not
bit
busy.
full.
She's not busy. She can fit some time in for us.
Yeah. I saw something about, she, like joking around. It's not real, but like Mahomes said she's been drawing up plays as like for just to be funny. And I saw a 49ers fan saying if we lose another Super Bowl and it's to the Taylor Swift play, I'm going to end it all right there.
The first 2-point conversion trick play that they try will be the Taylor Swift whatever play.
Okay, we're going to wrap up this episode of the Winged Wheel Podcast and jump into our Patreon exclusive overtime. Thank you all so very much for tuning into the Winged Wheel Podcast. To all of our sponsors of the show, thank you very much for supporting. And to all of our Patreon supporters, we cannot do the show without you. Patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast if you want to support the show. And if you want to support the show, but Patreon's not for you, other ways you can support are by leaving a rating wherever you get your podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your show, leave a rating. It does help. YouTube, leave the thumbs up, subscribe on YouTube or wherever else, tell a friend about the show. All that is a great way to support the Winged Wheel Podcast. We'd like to thank all of our name level supporters on Patreon. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Samuel Soderholm, Icon, Alexander Hansen, Victor Zetterberg, Ghost of OSBP, Glenn Brabham, Bronner's Left Knee, Ashley Whitehead, Sea Lion, Matthew M. Rice, Admiral Matt S. of the Cheesebag Navy, Carl Brutanen-Analuski, Carl Provy, Citizen High Five, Clip Clop Nene, Connor Scovey, Denny's, Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Cider, Dickens, formerly Marlon Winchester, DJ Denton, Elizabeth Rose Alvarez, Eric Hill, God Creatives, Give Blood Fight Probert, Goose Looney's Drinking Club, Hockeytown Love, Hockeytown Matt, Hassam Al-Qassem, Jay Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jeff Pridemore, Jonathan Miller, Kaylin Wood, Let's Go Red Wings, Marcus, Marty, Matt Keeler, Matt McKay, Michael Edlund, R.A., Raul Pud, Riley Enright, Ryan Britt, Scott Martin, Skeletor, That's What I Appreciate About You, The New Jackson 5 Holes, Wallman's Elite Dancing D, Iserplan Sten, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, A.A. Ron, A.B., Adam Rose, All Motor No Hands, Ann Stanislavski, Axel Sandy Pelika, Bellingham Acid Balls, Chimkim Nutgets, Chuck Buff Chest, The Tarpluskoon, Connor Leighton, Corey Prida, Darren Fick, Datsukes, Dangleberries, Eric Nance, Frank Stanley, Gene Sullivan, Goon in the Room, Griffey Boy, Ian, Jacob Zwaniga, James Pridemore, Jeremiah Dobo, Jim, J.M. Rhapsody, Joey Jojo Shabadoo, John Evans Derogatory, John Engels, Josh Yelton, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Les Grossman's Ungodly Firestorm, Linda Hull, Ophelia, Steven, The Hodag, The Hat 123, Trent Thorough, Wings Fan in Chi-Town, Wings Fan in St. Louis, Scott, and your second favorite patron. Thank you all so very much. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.